In our headlines on this Monday, April 7th, here in South Korea. An early presidential election may take place on June 3rd amid the current leadership vacuum here in South Korea as rival political parties prepare to mount their respective campaigns. Meanwhile, stocks surrendered substantial ground shortly after opening trade on this Monday, with the KOSPI plunging some 5%, triggering a circuit breaker for 5 minutes to prevent panic selling as investors respond to fears over U.S. tariffs. And speaking of U.S. tariffs, the Trump administration reaffirms the implementation of country-specific tariffs on April 9th as scheduled, following the 10% baseline tariff on imports of all foreign origin goods into the American market that went into effect this past weekend. Come summer this year, South Korea will usher in a new president into its top office as preparations are well underway for an early election, most likely on the 3rd of June. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young has the latest.
The date for South Korea's 21st presidential election has been tentatively set for June 3rd. That's according to Yonhap News Agency, with the date expected to be confirmed at Tuesday's cabinet meeting. South Korea's presidential race is heating up as rival parties roll up their sleeves to prepare for a 2-month race following the Constitutional Court's decision to remove former President Yoon Suk-yeol from office. The People Power Party formed an election committee on Monday for the upcoming presidential primary. The party chose Hwang Woo-yeol, a former party interim leader and former 5-term lawmaker, as its election committee chair.
Since Hwang recently served as our party's interim emergency committee leader after the general election, he knows the party well. We believe he's the right person to run the primary fairly and objectively.
The party on Sunday decided to continue with its current leadership, with interim leader Kwon Young-se and floor leader Kwon Song-dong set to stay to carry out the remainder of the presidential election process. The party does not have a clear frontrunner, with some local media outlets expecting as many as 10 contenders to enter the race. Among them is Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo, who hinted at another run after he finished second to Yoon Suk-yeol in the party's 2022 presidential primary. Seoul Mayor Oh Se-won is also frequently mentioned as a potential candidate. The most high-profile name, however, is former party chair Han Dong-un, once a close confidant of Yoon, who later distanced himself from the former president and publicly supported impeachment following the martial law declaration. Meanwhile, Democratic Party chair Lee Jae-myung, widely seen as the likely DP candidate, is expected to step down from his leadership role and make an official declaration to enter the race as early as Wednesday. Running as party chair could raise concerns about bias in the primary process. Local media anticipate that his formal announcement will come when the presidential election date is officially confirmed. Once he steps down, the DP plans to hold a meeting to set up an election committee for the primary.
We only have about 30 days for the primary, so we need to sort out any party rules, make changes if needed, and set up the election committee to get ready for the presidential race.
Politicians outside the East faction within the DP are also preparing to enter the race. Among them, former DP lawmaker Kim Do-gun was the first to make an official declaration to join the race. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The parliament here is also looking to revise the country's constitution, and within the reform proposals is one that grants presidents 2 4-year terms instead of the current single 5-year term. Our Kim Do-yeon covers this plan and more.
The leaders of South Korea's 2 major parties on Monday gave the green light to National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik's proposal for constitutional reform in light of the upcoming presidential election. But it came with a caveat, as the chair of the Democratic Party of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, is cautious as there are more important tasks at hand.
But right now, what's far more urgent and important is preventing the destruction of democracy. The immediate focus should be on ending the insurrection. I hope the People Power Party isn't thinking of using constitutional reform as a way to simply move past this. But yes, reform is necessary.
However, he confirmed that he agrees that certain aspects of the Constitution need to be changed, such as adding the spirit of the Gwangju May 18th pro-democratization movement to the Constitution, among other things. Laws need to be revised for this nationwide referendum to happen, and he has agreed to get work done to make it possible alongside the presidential election in less than 60 days. In terms of the presidential term, he agreed on 2 4-year terms like the US model. Meanwhile, the People Power Party welcomed the constitutional reform proposal while saying that they're already working on the details from their side.
It's not just about dispersing power. The system must be restructured so checks and balances function properly. Just as presidential powers are being reviewed, the authority of the National Assembly must also be adjusted in a balanced way.
Kwon said that as much as the presidential authority needs to be adjusted, the parliament's authority needs to be adjusted as well. At the moment, the parliament has impeachment motion power over 4 different branches of government, and Kwon says it has been imperialistic with its power recently, as the opposition holds the majority of the floor. He said no one expected this in 1987 when the current constitution was passed, saying it needs to reflect the world we live in now. Speaker Woo, after the 2 leaders' comments, welcomed the 2 main parties are on board with the constitutional reform. But as the DP leader was cautious, the referendum targeted for the next presidential election in less than 60 days can just be on what's agreed upon until then. With the presidential powers at the heart of the constitutional reform debate, voters heading to the polls in less than 60 days won't just be choosing the next president. They'll also be weighing each party's vision for the presidency and its powers, especially in the wake of a push for a martial law rule by a former president. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, a baseline U.S. tariff of 10% on imports of all foreign origin goods into the American market went into effect this past weekend, and the heavier country-specific duties are poised to take effect this coming Wednesday U.S. time, with no prospect of a postponement. Our Moon Ji-young has details.
U.S. President Donald Trump has refused to back down on tariffs on imports from most countries, despite the market turmoil they have caused. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One on Sunday evening, Trump characterized the tariff duties as quote medicine, while panicked investors continued a massive sell-off of global stocks. He warned foreign governments that they would have to pay a lot of money to lift sweeping tariffs.
I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even.
When asked about a potential trade deal with China, Trump underscored that no agreement would be reached unless the U.S. trade deficit with Beijing, currently at $1 trillion, is addressed. He also claimed that tariffs caused China to pull back from a deal regarding TikTok, which was nearly finalized, highlighting this as evidence of, quote, the power of tariffs. In response to tariff on Europe, Trump stated that the U.S. cannot afford to spend heavily on NATO to protect Europe while losing money on trade. Meanwhile, speaking to NBC on Sunday morning, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said more than 50 countries have begun negotiating with the U.S. since the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs. The comments go in line with Trump's remarks last week that every country has called the U.S. for talks. On the same day, Trump shared a post on social media that massive financial deficits can be cured only with tariffs, calling them a, quote, beautiful thing to behold. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Well, regardless of those remarks by Mr. Trump, the Korean stock market tumbled during early trade on this Monday, with a circuit breaker going into effect briefly in the morning to ward off panic selling. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff announcements have triggered massive sell-offs across South Korea's stock market. The Korea Exchange at 9:12 a.m. on Monday activated a sell-side sidecar for the first time in 8 months when the KOSPI 200 futures index fell 5.19% to 312.05. A sidecar is triggered when the KOSPI 200 futures index rises or falls by 5% or more and stays there for at least 1 minute. On Monday, the sidecar was activated for 5 minutes. And stock indexes also took a hit amid mounting investor concerns over the impact of U.S. tariffs. Both the benchmark KOSPI and the tech-heavy KOSDAQ closed down more than 5%, the KOSPI down 5.57% to around 2,328, and the KOSDAQ 5.25% to 651. But one expert said a decline of this size is likely a temporary phenomenon, which is why a circuit breaker, triggered when the KOSPI and KOSDAQ indexes fall by 8% or more, is unlikely to be activated.
Today's market decline was likely driven by last Friday's slump in the U.S. market and President Trump's hardline stance over the weekend, which led to a 3 to 4% drop in U.S. futures that triggered foreign investor sell-offs. As such, the downturn is unlikely to continue for long.
The loss was led by foreign investors offloading shares as they reacted to sharp losses in U.S. markets. On Friday local time, Wall Street suffered sharp losses with the broad-based S&P 500 closing down 6%, the tech-heavy Nasdaq 5.8%, and the Dow Jones fell around 5.5%. This marked the second straight day of major losses, with the S&P and Dow Jones both suffering the biggest one-day drop since June 2020 on Thursday. In the foreign exchange market on Monday, the Korean won weakened against the dollar, closing at around 1,467, down 33.71 from the previous session after briefly topping 1,470 during intraday trading. The same expert said this reflects fears of a potential global economic downturn, noting that Korea's exchange rate with the dollar has surpassed the 1,401 mark 3 times in the past, during the 1997 IMF crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, and the U.S. Fed's aggressive rate hikes in 2022. 이수진, 아리랑 뉴스.
And as expected, a state-run think tank has highlighted the presence of greater external risk factors to the South Korean economy, notably U.S. trade barriers. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryan reports.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed continued downside risks to South Korea's economy for the 4th consecutive month, citing growing uncertainties in global trade. In the April edition of its monthly Economic Trends report, the Korea Development Institute stated that external conditions are rapidly deteriorating in light of the recent tariff announcement from the United States. And paired with a slowdown in both domestic and global demand, the situation is exacerbating. Last week, Washington announced that it would impose tariffs of 25% on South Korean goods and a separate 25% tariff on global automobiles and auto parts. Automobiles are South Korea's top export to the United States, with nearly half of the country's total auto shipments headed there last year. The KDI noted that if the U.S. continues to escalate its protectionist trade measures, as U.S. President Trump has threatened to do, it could further erode corporate sentiment and hinder investment and export growth. While South Korea's exports rose by more than 3% in March, the think tank warned that this recovery remains fragile, with exports in the first quarter of the year showing a contraction due to a slowdown in the ICT sector. The KDI also pointed to continued sluggish consumer spending as another drag on the economy. While internal consumption of durable goods briefly rebounded thanks to a temporary tax cut on automobiles for the first half of the year, overall retail sales for January and February were down with persistent weakness in sales of semi-durable and non-durable goods. Consumer sentiment in March stayed pessimistic, with the central bank's consumer sentiment index data showing that it has yet to recover to levels seen before the martial law declaration last December. Going forward, the think tank stressed the importance of closely monitoring both global development and domestic demand to avoid further drag on recovery. Moon Hae-ryan, 아리랑 뉴스.
Top diplomats of the G7 have shared concerns over China's recent war games around Taiwan. In a joint statement, they described Beijing's activities as destabilizing and urged for dialogue to address differences. The foreign ministers also asserted that these regional tensions endanger international stability and prosperity. Now, last week, the Chinese military held 2 days of training around Taiwan, involving long-range live-fire drills. Meanwhile, a recent Russian airstrike on a residential area in the Ukrainian leader's hometown is prompting much outrage as it comes amid U.S. efforts to hammer out a ceasefire deal. Our Pyongyang reports.
Twisted steel beams, shattered windows, and other mangled remains of residential blocks now scar the skyline of Kryvyi after a Russian missile strike on April 4th killed at least 20 people, including children playing in a park. Dozens were injured. As Ukraine observed a day of mourning, Russia launched more missiles and drones at Kyiv on Sunday, killing one and wounding several others. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks and criticized the U.S.'s tepid response to the attack on Kryvyi, his hometown.
Staying silent about the fact that it is Russia killing children with ballistic missiles is wrong and dangerous. It only emboldens Moscow to continue the war and keep ignoring diplomacy.
While Washington has yet to respond officially, Secretary of State Marco Rubio hinted at a possible shift in policy. Speaking in Brussels on Friday following a two-day NATO meeting, Rubio suggested that Washington's patience with Moscow is wearing thin and warned that Russia could soon face additional U.S. sanctions. Amid the military crisis, Ukraine is preparing for talks in Washington next week on a new draft for a mineral deal. According to the Associated Press, Ukraine's economy minister Yulia Svididenko confirmed that a Ukrainian delegation, including officials from the ministries of Economy, Foreign Affairs, Justice, and Finance, will head to the U.S. next week. The proposed agreement would give the U.S. access to critical resources such as rare earths, oil, and gas. European leaders are also pushing for tougher measures. French President Emmanuel Macron called for an immediate ceasefire and strong action if Russia continues to stall. Finnish President Alexander Stubb proposed April 20th, which marks both Easter and the 3-month anniversary of President Donald Trump's inauguration, as a deadline for Russia to comply with ceasefire terms. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, a fire broke out early on this Monday at a thermal power plant. Unfortunately, no fatalities were reported. According to authorities here, the blaze began at around 9:30 a.m. at the Honam thermal power plant located in Yeosu in the eastern part of Jeollanam-do province. The flame was tamed in about an hour and a half, and officials have now launched an investigation into its cause. For the 8th year in a row, K-pop remains the first thing that comes to the minds of foreigners when asked about Korean culture. This is according to the latest annual survey by the Culture Ministry, whose results were released on this Monday, showing almost 18% with exposure to Korean culture, highlighting K-pop as the top item on the list of Korean culture. This was followed by Korean food and K-dramas. The most favored K-pop artist in the survey was BTS, which has held the top spot for 7 straight years. For those of you here in Seoul looking for a peaceful place to indulge in books, the King's Study at Gyeongbokgung Palace is open as a small public library. Our Choi Seong has a glimpse.
Spring has arrived in Gyeongbokgung Palace. This part of the palace is called Jibokje, which means collecting precious jewels such as jade. It is connected with Parujong, an octagonal 2-story pavilion, and Hyopgildang Hall, showcasing a distinctive traditional architectural beauty. Inside the buildings, over 1,000 books fill the walls, and people look around and read. From April 2nd, the Jibokje has been opened as a small library. Here, visitors can read books, relax, and enjoy a moment of peace. The low ceilings gives visitors a cozy feeling and lets them see the beautiful tancheong, traditional Korean patterns, up close.
I think it's, peaceful, quiet. I feel lucky to be here, actually. So I choose other books like poem, just to see how it's writing.
We came here to enjoy the nice weather and also to learn more about our culture. The atmosphere is very calm and peaceful, and it feels like the perfect place to relax. We are having a really great time.
Since 2016, the Korea Heritage Service has opened this space for free to allow visitors to experience the palace more closely. This building was built in 1881 and was used by King Gyeongbokgung as a study and to receive foreign envoys. It closed during the COVID-19 pandemic but reopened in 2022. Currently, this place has over 1,700 books related to the history of the Joseon dynasty and royal family.
It also offers books for children, foreign language translations, and rare resources such as the annals of the Joseon dynasty, which are not easily found elsewhere.
The office plans to hold programs such as Meet the Author events and book talks at the library. The Gyeongbokgung Small Library will be open until October 31st, except in July and August. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. The U.S. has announced it will immediately revoke all visas held by South Sudanese passport holders, citing the African nation's failure to accept the return of its repatriated citizens. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement on Saturday that South Sudan's transitional government has not complied with international norms by refusing to accept its nationals deported from the United States. As a result, the U.S. Department of State is revoking all existing visas held by South Sudanese citizens and halting the issuance of new visas to these individuals. The unprecedented decision, the first of its kind aimed at a specific country since the Trump administration took office, comes amid concerns about a potential return to civil war in the African nation. Rubio accused South Sudan's government of taking advantage of the United States and added that the U.S. is prepared to review the recent actions when South Sudan demonstrates full cooperation in accepting its repatriated citizens. In the Middle East, 2 British members of parliament have been denied entry into Israel during a planned visit to the occupied West Bank. Israel accused the 2 lawmakers of plans to spread anti-Israel hatred. Labour MPs Abdessim Mohammed and Yuan Yang were detained upon arrival at Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport on Saturday local time. The Israeli Immigration Authority stated they intended to document the security forces and spread hate speech against Israel, leading to their deportation. The MPs asserted that they were part of a parliamentary delegation alongside charities visiting humanitarian aid projects in the West Bank. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy called Israel's actions unacceptable, counterproductive, and deeply concerning. In the African country of the Democratic Republic of Congo, torrential rain led to severe flooding in the capital Kinshasa over the weekend, resulting in at least 22 deaths. 46 people were hospitalized and 75 families also had to be temporarily relocated due to the conditions. The flooding disrupted access to more than half of the city and its main airport. While Kinshasa, home to over 12 million residents, experiences frequent flooding during the rainy season, the weekend's rain marks the city's first major deluge of the year. Similar flooding in the capital city in 2022 killed over 100 people. Finally, in the U.S. state of Los Angeles, a minke whale that had been swimming in Long Beach Harbor last week was found dead on Sunday morning local time. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is collaborating with local officials to determine the cause of death. Earlier efforts to guide the whale out of the harbor were unsuccessful as it repeatedly returned despite attempts by experts to encourage its departure. The whale's appearance in the harbor last week had attracted crowds eager to catch a glimpse of the marine mammal. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Today was a perfect day to enjoy outdoor activities. Warm spring weather feeling like late April to early May continued across the country. Leaving the chilly morning behind, the temperature in Seoul rose up to 20 degrees Celsius today. It will be as warm as 9 degrees in the morning and 19 degrees during the day in Seoul tomorrow. The daily temperature difference will widen to around 10 degrees nationwide. From tonight, the sky will gradually become cloudy in the west of central regions, including Seoul. There is some light rain forecast of less than 5 millimeters overnight in this area. Most of it will stop at dawn tomorrow, but it could be accompanied by gusty winds and thunderstorms. Tomorrow morning, Chuncheon will start off at 7 degrees, Daejeon and Gyeongju at 10 degrees. Daily highs will move up to at least 19 degrees across the country. Between Wednesday and Thursday and on the weekend, there's news of rain across the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching.